Hi all, I'm Rachel and welcome to this e-learning on the fundamentals of effective feedback practice. Today we're going to focus on feed up, feedback and feed forward. Here we have the 24 teaching areas of the STP and we have 3 teaching areas under assessment and feedback. Here the diagram may give the wrong impression that assessment and feedback only happens at the end after lesson enactment. I'd like to suggest that good feedback is actually premised on good task design, students' understanding of standards, as well as good feedback practices. So we'll explore some of these ideas in the upcoming section. Good feedback is not about how much a teacher writes for students in terms of feedback comments or how well the feedback comments are worded. Drawing from Sadler's idea, effective feedback is about students knowing what is good performance, knowing how after they've done a task, their current performance relates to the good performance. And if there's a difference, we call that the gap. And most importantly, how to close that gap between their current performance and good performance. Drawing from Sadler's idea, we can identify 3 essential elements of feedback practice. And they are feeding up, helping students know where they are going, feeding back after they've done a task to tell them how well they have done. That will help us establish the gap, and feed forward, help students know how to act on the feedback and to close the gap. In this segment, we'll look at feed up, what teachers can do to help students know where they are going. In some classrooms, what and will statements have been used to communicate learning intention and success criteria. This is a good practice. The only cautionary tale to remember is that these statements should be referred to during and after the lesson and not just communicated at the beginning of the lesson. There are other ways to communicate standards and success criteria, and we will look at each of them in turn, beginning with checklists. This is an example of a checklist in the context of English writing. And we call these process checklists because it communicates things that students should do while they are doing the letter writing. I'd like to share with you 3 cautionary tales when it comes to using checklists as part of feeding up. The first caution I'd like to raise in the use of a checklist for feeding up is not to overdo it. Here, the overzealous teacher has converted a checklist into a template for students to use when writing a letter. The problem with this is that when the scaffold is never removed, there is no confidence that the child can actually write a letter without the template. So let's not overdo the use of a checklist in this way by templatizing everything. This is an example of a checklist in the context of good oral speaking. So the cautionary tale in this case is to avoid making your checklist into a long to-do list. Essentially, a checklist should communicate success criteria. Can you see what could be the underlying success criteria students should know about good oral speaking from this list? Consider the second last item. I maintain eye contact with the examiner. Now, what could good eye contact convey about the success criteria of good oral speaking? Do you agree that students should know that the success criteria is about confident speaking or confident delivery more than making eye contact? So go after the success criteria rather than to make a checklist into a long to-do list. This is an example of a checklist in the context of a science practical. So the cautionary tale is to avoid using your checklist only once. Notice that here the teacher writes first try, so there must have been a second try, and reference back to this checklist in subsequent attempts. So here it's important to make transfer visible. Have students connect back with what they have done on the first try when they are working on similar or parallel tasks. So think about a checklist in terms of a reusable rather than a single-use item. Other than checklists, scripts can be helpful in communicating standards and success criteria at the feed-up stage. A script is simply a set of prompts or questions or an acronym that's organized systematically to help students focus on the process, perform a particular task. So here I have some examples of scripts that might be used quite commonly in the classroom. For example, in reading a question, students may be asked to circle the 5W and 1H, underline the tenses, or bracket the keywords. So it communicates this set of good performance when reading or understanding a question. I invite you to share how you communicate success to your students using scripts in your subject discipline. So you can go to this Padlet link to post your idea. The only cautionary tale I like to raise at this juncture is that our students are bombarded with the use of different scripts across different subject disciplines. So it might be helpful to cohere or to find certain alignment between similar scripts that's used in the school for the purpose of helping them draw the links or see the connections.